So I've gone through a couple of teacher demo lessons and, been sweaty and really stressed and gotten through them. And I've also been on the other end. So as the founding director of operations at an independent charter school for close to 6 years, I've sat in on probably 100 demo lessons. Some have been awesome and some have been pretty terrible. And we want to make sure that you fall into the really awesome categories. And I also think that there are some misconceptions on what constitutes a really awesome demo lesson. So we want to help you identify what those characteristics are. It's also important to note that you might think that your lesson is pretty terrible, and the school may see a glimmer of something that is exactly what they're looking for. So the most important thing going into the demo lesson is to really understand what your strengths are as a teacher, what you want to communicate, and making sure that you stay on message as much as possible. So how many of you have given a demo lesson before? So just under half. And for most of you, it'll be your first one. Schools more and more are going to a demo lesson. Unfortunately, schools have had really stellar interviews with a grown-up, and then they put them in front of teachers on the first day of school, and things don't quite match up. So my very first teaching position, I'll admit to you, I fell into that category. So I was hired at 4 p.m. on a Friday before Labor Day weekend. And I think the principal just at that point was going to take anyone that walked in through the door, and my Teach for America placement helper, whatever their title was at the time, and it just put me in the right place at the right time. I certainly don't want any of you to be waiting until the Friday before Labor Day to know where you're going to be teaching, including grade level, including content area, all those fun things. So the goal of the lesson today is to identify challenges and then think through specific strategies. So who can tell me, either from experience or from your nightmares or stress dreams, what are some potential challenges of a teacher demo lesson if you don't know the students? Yeah. And you guys can just continue to call out.
A student might just spaz out for no reason.
Maybe being asked to teach, give a demo lesson in a subject area you're not comfortable with. So out of comfort or content, yeah. Anything else? You don't have an education background. So new career.
Your tech equipment fails.
It's almost a rule. What else?
Lesson was pretty small.
Yeah. So I'm going to just say we did this, right? That happens within the first 30 seconds, right?
What else?
I don't know about your nerves. Your nerves, yeah. Walking into a room that you don't know. So as this will go on, I imagine you'll think of even more, and that's why this is so stressful, right?
And administrator just wants some of the negative attitude.
I'll keep it as just admin in general, right? Like they might only come in for part of the lesson. They might come in and you just feel their energy not being right. It could be that they then leave right before you know that the great part of the lesson is coming. So it's certainly a variable there. So these are challenges. We're going to think through some strategies to overcome them. It's going to feel like a lot, okay? I'm going to give you a lot of stuff to think about, but I purposely want you to think about it all now when you're not in front of a group of students, so that you have the time to process, okay? Also, some of you might be thinking a school's going to give me the objective, or a school's going to tell me to plan whatever I want. These overarching strategies will apply to either situation. This deck will also be available through the selected site, so don't worry about copying it. You can just put the things that resonate with you. Okay? So our objective, teachers will identify the inherent challenges of the demo lesson, our beautiful chart, and plan to avoid these pitfalls. So we're going to spend 5 minutes, which we just did, brainstorming the challenges of a demo lesson. Then we are going to identify the components of a successful demo lesson. That's going to take us about 25 minutes. That's our lesson component. Then we're going to do a group share. So you'll identify specific strategies that you'll implement into your plan and share those out with the group. And then it'll be some individual reflection time so that you can really process this because everybody works at different paces. And then we can share out any questions, learnings, or anything else that comes to mind. So that's a bit about our agenda. We brainstorm challenges, but you didn't see this really awesome graphic of a storm rolling in. So now just take a second and think, oh, she really searches Flickr well, and I appreciate the compliment very much. So components of a successful demo lesson. The first planning happens even before you get there, okay? Chances are you aren't just picked off the street because of your good looks for your demo lesson. You've probably had a phone screen with the school before. During that phone screen, you should have communicated some of your strengths as a teacher, okay? So when you're thinking about how to structure your demo lesson, the demo lesson needs to be an extension of what you said you were good at. So if you tell me that you are an awesome classroom manager, that you are that teacher when there is a kid who's losing his cool down the hallway, the teachers bring them to you because then you'll calm them down and get them back in. And during the demo lesson, you can't manage the class, that's a huge red flag, right? Not even a flag, it's a whole banner. So you need to think about what your strengths are and really play up to those within your lesson. It sounds really obvious, but especially if you're given the lesson to do, it might be hard for you to think through that. So really think through what you're good at. The next thing is you need to ground your lesson in 1 or 2 standards. What often happens, especially with brand new teachers, is they want to say, look, I know how to look up the standards, and here are 10 standards that my lesson is going to cover, right? We are going to have our the standards around talking because they're going to share an answer, and I'm going to have my standard around annotation because I'm going to have a student come up and underline. No, pick 1 or 2 standards and really focus on those. Because what it tells me, if you come in with a list of 10 standards, is that you don't plan in a really purposeful way. So your standards should be exactly linked to your objective, which is going to be exactly linked to your assessment at the end.
Where do the standards come from?
The best place to look is you can look on Engage New York, and that'll give you the listing of them. Through Engage New York, you can also look at some exemplar lessons as well. You've heard a lot about Common Core in the world. Now they're going back to talking about them as New York State Learning Standards. Who knows what they're going to call them tomorrow, but that's a really good resource for you, okay? Just 1 or 2 standards, really focus on those. So I'm going to tell you to plan for a standalone lesson. 9 times out of 10, when I send a candidate, hey, come teach a demo lesson, they immediately wrote back with, great, what is 2nd grade doing right now? What is 6th grade doing right now, right? It feels like I'm going to take their instructional time, I'm going to build on that. If you do that and you try to fit it into the unit, you are falling right into the challenge of we did this, right? So either you are going to do something that they've already done, or you're going to teach it in a totally different way that they haven't learned, and it's just going to confuse them. So my advice, which might not seem to make a lot of sense, but please trust me, you want to plan a standalone lesson. So if they give you 45 minutes, something that can be taught really well in 45 minutes. If they give you 10 minutes, same thing. Something that can be taught within 10 minutes. The other thing to think through is teaching something new. What always happens then they get the students in the class to make predictions about the book. Have the students made predictions before? Yeah, even in kindergarten, they've made predictions, right? So you need to think about, what am I bringing that the students didn't know 10 or 20 minutes earlier that I'm teaching in a new way? So maybe it's a questioning strategy that they haven't used. Maybe it's a graphic organizer. Maybe it's a set of vocabulary words. You need to think about what is something new, and then you need to assess that mastery, okay? That assessment should not be, okay, show of hands if you all can make predictions now. Do you think if I don't know how to make predictions, I'm not gonna raise my hand? I'm seeing my friends all raise their hands, I'm gonna raise it as well, okay? So you really need to think through, what am I teaching them that's new, that's based on these standards, and then how am I gonna check for that understanding? What often happens is, in a demo lesson, you tell students, okay, take out your notebook, jot it down, and then you tell the interviewer, oh, I assessed their mastery because they wrote a sentence. Okay, but that sentence is now in their desk somewhere. You can't refer to it in the interview conversation afterward. Whereas if you created something, had a clear assessment, then when you meet with the principal after, you can say, 6 out of 10 students were able to ask the question in response to the text and have that evidence right in front of you. That's really important.
Can I ask a question? So are you thinking something along the lines of, say, a graphic organizer, something that you can collect from them?
Yeah.
Not like asking questions and having them answer the questions. That would be your assessment piece.
Correct.
Okay.
So I want to make sure that I'm asking questions along the way
Sure.
to see how I have to adjust, but that shouldn't be the assessment at the end. So what I would suggest is having just like an exit slip of some type. Maybe it has the vocabulary that they're going to learn, all of their learning in one place, and then you quickly collect it at the end. Okay, that's really important. What I often see, and I'll get to your question in just a second, is people say, oh, I only had 20 minutes for the lesson. Yeah, you only had 20 minutes for the lesson, right? The principal planned it that way, they know that. So you need to think about what is an assessment that's maybe 5 minutes, but you still need to assess them, okay? Because what it tells me if you don't have an assessment is that 20 minutes don't mean anything, and you want to communicate that sense of urgency in your practice. Yes.
So just for your third point, if you're asked to teach on a specific topic, though, I'm assuming you should do that. Like the school says, we're teaching exponential functions.
Right.
You do that, you know.
Yeah, you don't want to, say, oh, you taught me to teach, exponents. I didn't feel like it. I was doing something else. Don't do that, right? There's a time to think outside the box. That's definitely not it. And if they give you a scripted lesson, that's a totally separate thing. But if they give you that you want me to teach exponents, I'm still identifying the standards if they haven't. I'm still thinking about what's something new with exponents that maybe they haven't done. So a really fun game, and then doing an assessment to see what they're ready for next. Okay.
So it can be, the demo lesson can either be they give you a topic, they ask you to just pick something within the grade level, okay, or it can be a scripted lesson. With the scripted stuff, do they give it to you in advance, or do they give it to you when you show up?
Yeah, that's a great question. Has anyone had that experience? Yeah.
They give it to you in advance, that's what they do.
Oh, okay.
They send everything that you need to start, and they have the lesson, how many kids is going to be there, which means a grade.
I've had it where they've given me an objective and they said, you'll teach this objective in 6th grade, so it's been less. But schools that have a scripted curriculum, that would be further approach. Any other questions as they come up, continue to jot them, and we can either talk through them as we go, or if it's back a little, we can talk through them at the end. The last thing, which I kind of alluded to, a clear and measurable objective. So if you're told to teach around exponents, your objective is going to say exactly what those students are doing with the exponents, and then how you're going to measure that mastery.
They don't give you like a
question. So the question was, will schools tell you what resources they have available? It depends on the individual school, right? So sometimes they'll say, yep, we have projectors, we have a document camera, and other times you won't have that level of detail. That's definitely an okay question for follow-up. Okay. The next point here is avoid fluff. So I can't tell you how many times I've sat through demo lessons where the assessment is some sort of art project, right? So they'll read a book and then they'll draw a picture about their feelings, okay? Even in kindergarten, we don't want to see that. We want to see a sentence starter in a way that they answer it. I've also seen people break out these shapes and then they glue it together. One time a teacher made a snow globe, which I'm sure was really wonderful. That's not what the teachers want to see. I'm sure you design really beautiful art things, but it's not the place in the demo lesson, okay? It's really important. Even if you're at a school that is more ideologically aligned with incorporating the arts, think about a way to bring in a chant or a song or something to show that without doing an art project. Okay? I can't stress that enough. So the reason is because it's tied to your objective, right? And your objective is they're going to learn this and they're going to show it in this way. It's not pushing the rigor. So even in first grade, students should be able to write a complete sentence. So that would be a better objective rather than just coloring or drawing, okay? Those are things that will certainly be fun, but inevitably it'll eat away a lot of time of your lesson, which is already time constraints. So you'll run into some challenges. Okay? I love art. Right? I'm not like the art police, you know, I have 2 kids, we have a whole art center, I get it. But this is sort of like demo lesson, Jamie, and then, you know, free time, Jamie. So, components of a successful demo lesson, thinking through how do you want the students grouped, okay? Inevitably, what happens is you might walk into a room that's set up like this. You might walk into a room with a really great rung area, and you might walk into a room that has desks as groups. You want to think about which setup is best for your particular lesson, okay? If I was teaching an 8th grade lesson, and I taught 8th grade for 2 years, and if I told my students to come to the rug, there would be a riot, okay? They are not coming to the rug, they are not sitting that close to even their best friend, they don't want to do it. If I'm teaching a 2nd or a 3rd grade lesson, and there's a clear rug area in the room, then I can assume the teacher does that often, and if I'm reading a book, and I don't want to hear 25 times, I can't see the page, I can't see the page, I'm going to bring them to the rug. Okay? So think about what physical setup is best. It's okay in the question ahead of time to ask, how are the desks in the room configured, to give you a general understanding, but also don't get tripped up on it. So if you walk into a room and it's set up like that, you can still have students count off 1-2s and make pair rooms, okay? If students are seated at their desk and you see a rug space, you can call students that look ready and transfer them to the rug and do your lesson there. And I would encourage you to think about those ways because that shows you how you can manage a group in a really effective way. Okay? So, thank you Google Images for these spreadsheets. You'll want to think about how to create a positive classroom community. And now you're thinking, she's lost her mind, they've only given me 10 minutes, how am I going to build a positive classroom community? We're not expecting everybody to sing Kumbaya by the end and run up and hug you, but you do need to establish really clear norms and expectations and find ways to bring joy into the classroom. So I think about one teacher, her name is Sam, and she gave a lesson that wasn't so great. It was some math lesson, maybe fractions. It went right over the 4th graders' heads. They didn't really get it. What she did though, every time the student shared, she had them do a cheer, where like they went up in the roller coaster and then they were cheering and then, you know, they did something with their arms. And that's what myself and the other staff member who were assigned to her demo remembered, and she actually was given the position just based on the chance. So if there's a song that you do as students transition from one activity to the next, find a way to bring it into your demo lesson. If there's a way that you celebrate students in a really joyful way, find a way to bring it in, even if they gave you a scripted lesson, to show that you value those types of positive interactions and you would bring them to the class. Okay? And you should also think about a quick getting to know you or intro activity. So another teacher comes to mind, Sarah, who in her email before the lesson said, can I have the first names of all of the third graders that I'll be doing my demo lesson with? Sure. I have an Excel sheet with them. I sent her the names. She came in with name tags, and there were different colors, so whatever color the student had was what group they were in. That showed me that she knew how to manage a classroom, and she cared about those details. Okay? And 5 years later, she's still a rock star teacher. So think about little ways that you can do that. The school might say, no, I don't have the time, I'm not giving you the names of our students. Then maybe if they're age appropriate, you can, just put a couple of name tags on the desk. They can write it out really quickly, or maybe they can say their name before they share. But think about those little ways to really build community. Right. This is a little teacher joke. One size fits all store. You'll notice some different size animals here. So differentiation. What happens is teachers often email and say, hey, what levels are the students reading on? There are laws to protect students' privacy, so we're not going to give you the most recent reading assessment data. We're also not going to necessarily have a class that's all on the same level. So you need to think through ways to differentiate for different types of learners within the school, within the classroom community. So you should assume that at least one student in the class will have an IEP. You should also assume that there will be at least one student who is learning English either as a second language or new acronym I just learned, English as a new language. IEP is an individualized education plan. So if a student receives mandated services, they have an IEP. So it's students with disabilities. Their IEP may mandate speech. Their IEP may mandate a para, any sort of different setting. Thinking through differentiation for different types of learners within the class. And then also those that breeze through. Right? The ones who are like, we did this already, I got this, and they're done. You don't want to stand there for 10 minutes with nothing for them to do. So does anyone have an idea? What is something that we could do for a student that has an IEP that might be sitting in on your demo lesson?
I think if you have a demo lesson and they tell you what you teach, maybe you can look somewhere in that curriculum. They usually have a section called intervention. You can look in there and use that.
Yeah, so if I looked in an intervention, maybe if they're doing 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication numbers, maybe there's a student in the class that needs practice just with the 1-digit by 1-digit, so I can have a worksheet for them. Maybe they're not ready for all the information to be communicated the way I'm just kind of spewing it at you. So maybe I give them a graphic organizer and they see a student who maybe needs it and I just slip it to them, okay? Thinking about those subtle ways to show, I got this, I'm thinking about all the learners is really important. For English language learners, the best and most straightforward way is to identify 2 or 3 vocabulary words that you'll be covering. So the lesson with exponents, I'm going to have exponents posted on the board so that there's a visual to the word that I'm using. I'm going to give a clear definition of that. Okay? Maybe if you're reading James and the Giant Peach, there is 2 vocabulary words that come up, and same thing, I'm gonna highlight those. Okay, that's applicable for all grade levels. Any ideas for visual, kinesthetic, or auditory learners? Things that you can do pretty simply across contents.
Visually goals, goals are his sound, so maybe music or something connected is movement, so if you wanna have like a dance to your lesson or something like it's moving.
Yeah. And even as you go over the vocabulary words, right? Maybe they do something with their hands as you do it. Yeah, something that's really quick. Just thinking through those different ways, because everybody's going to process the information a bit differently. And then for fast finishers, the best thing that you can do is have another worksheet in your back pocket. So when you're going around to assess their mastery and you see that student, you can slip them another worksheet saying, oh, you're ready for another challenge. And you'll see the administrators in the back of the room, right, all excited and writing your job offer. So you want to bring that with you as well.
For fast finishers, could you give them an exit slip or maybe make them, after you check their work quickly, make them like a tutor or a helper to the other children's work?
Yeah, you can certainly do that. I think the challenge is you don't know the behavior dynamics the way that you would in your regular classroom. So there's some students that can really handle that responsibility. And then I think about some of my students who would be dancing around the room and probably making it more of a spectacle. So just think about ways to limit those.
And I work in groups when you're asking for activities.
Yeah, so if you want to do group work, certainly a great thing to include. Some things that you want to consider about the groups is setting the norms and expectations for them. So you don't just want to say, okay, you guys are going to work together, you guys are going to work together. You should either set specific jobs that each person in the group has, set volume expectations for them, and again, like a clear assessment or product that the group is providing.
Question for the IEP students and like the confidentiality, how much can you ask? Because again, like modifications for learning disability versus, something, are going to be very different. And
Yeah.
trying to plan blind.
Yeah, that's a great question. So you actually won't know, right? And if any school tells
Right.
you, then chances are
It's not.
yeah, should think twice maybe about that. But in the conversation that you'll have after, most times the administrator will say, how would you differentiate for students with disabilities? So it's just a sort of like blanket, like I know that there will be someone in this room that has that, here's how I could prepare. But you won't know what they're working with, right? It could be OT, it could be PT, there's so many different categories. Yeah. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to think of like having, obviously you can't plan for every disability, I'm a special ed person, so
Yeah.
that's why it's like a forefront, but it's also really hard because then you might end up in a situation where you have a child that's really struggling and, any kind of.
Yeah.
Would it be out of the norm to ask if they can create this setup like just putting 2 adults together for example in pairs, or is it better for a teacher to come and say everyone's getting this pairs?
Yeah. So the question is, can you ask them to sort of set up in pairs or something like that? The way I think about it is you're a guest in their space, right? So if I go to my mother-in-law's house, I am tiptoeing on eggshells for the entire weekend that I'm there, right? I want to show her that her son married someone who's so easygoing and it's anything and, all those things, even though, that's not always true. So the same thing when you go into somebody's classroom, right? Like you could ask, and you might have someone who's the cooperating teacher who's totally fine with that. You might also have someone who, under the list of challenges, just isn't having a great day. So I don't want you to set yourself up for failure in that way. I think a better way would just be, okay, count off, turn around, and just keep it moving.
From scratch.
Yeah. Minimize the asks, and you won't set yourself up for just commitment. Ready to move on? take the lesson off the page, okay? So bring pre-made visuals. As beautiful as this is, right? This is not showcasing necessarily who I am as a teacher and that I'm really gonna captivate student learning. But if you brought something that's pre-made, has the objective, it shows me that you just take that extra step and you're ready for all those things, okay? So many demo lessons have somebody just making a quick Venn diagram and then they don't like the way the circle looks and then they erase it. Have it all ready to go ahead of time. You'll just set yourself up for success, okay? You also should avoid a standard worksheet. So you're teaching a lesson on exponents, and you don't want to just take a random worksheet and copy it and give that up to students. You can take one or two of those questions, certainly, but you want to communicate that you've really thought through what do students need to master my objective and how are they going to show that learning. Okay, so really cater it to that. And the other thing is find a way to keep time. So inevitably, our phones house everything, right? And Twitter and, you know, breaking news and there's a hurricane coming and God knows what else causes your phone to make all sorts of noises. And we don't want anything that takes you off your A game. So if you use your phone to keep time, just set it to airplane mode ahead of time because you don't want to get stressed out during your lesson or more stressed out.
It's kind of a sort of question. Like, so if you were to use your phone for your lesson for like voice or whatever, like effects, is that typically because obviously cell phones are allowed in professional settings, but in this type of situation, depending on its use.
It depends on its use, right? So if you had like a, I don't know, a cheer or something, as long as it's purposeful, and again, I think to set the timer is pretty customary. I think you kind of know the difference, right? When someone's just in their phone quickly and then when something catches their eye. So just be aware of it. Avoiding stress. Thank you for the chuckles. I like that. So assume that you're going to walk into the classroom and immediately begin teaching, okay? It doesn't mean that the school wants to set you up for failure, but what happens is a student might have just had a tantrum, a student might just have gone to the bathroom on himself, maybe the assembly went over and you're kind of being rushed in before the students go to lunch. There's a lot of different things that can happen, so assume that you're going to just be thrown into the classroom and begin teaching. There were some candidates who were particular, even before they walked into the classroom, about how much setup time they needed. And that inadvertently sets the message that you don't value the work that's already happening in that classroom, right? Like they're taking time away from their instructional day to demo you, and they're probably demoing 3 or 4 other people for the same job. So it's really important that you really respect that time. So thinking back to bringing those visuals, if I have those charts and a piece of tape and I just come in and I pop it on the wall, I'm ready to go, okay? What might happen otherwise is, you know, the screen is this big, there's nowhere to put your chart, you want to create something, don't set yourself up in that way. Bring everything that you need. Okay, if you're doing a measurement lesson, do we think that you need to bring, 40 protractors? No, but you should bring all the things that you need for your lesson to go really successfully because you don't want to rely on the teacher who might not have those things handy, right? You might be doing a math lesson in a teacher's room, and that period she might be the French teacher, so she doesn't know where those things are. So it's really important that you bring what you need or you communicate with your interviewer, these are the things that I would need, okay? It also shows that you're organized and together and all of those important things. And another challenge that we had, so plan for a technology fail. So you could either have everything printed out, even though you might not need it. You could think about ways to bring the students closer to you, to read a book. Just plan for the technology to go out so you're not surprised when it does.
Is it acceptable to ask ahead of time, if there are certain materials that you might want that are often like standard in a classroom? Is it okay to ask that?
100%. So things like, pencils and pens and rulers and those kind of things, definitely. I think it gets tricky if you're teaching during the art block, right? So you might be in the art classroom doing a math lesson, right? So you just need to communicate ahead of time what you need.
For a demo lesson, does administration think it's important to include some type of technology in your lesson, regardless of the subject?
I think it would depend on the school.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if the school, one of their key design elements is technology, I'd certainly want to see candidates that are well versed in it. It's not imperative. So I've seen really good lessons without technology. Also, think about what your strengths are, right? So if your strength is technology, I better see a PowerPoint that's far superior to this, right? Or like something that kind of jumps out and has bells and whistles and everything else. If that's not my strength, I don't need to sell it that way, right? I just need to find out what I'm better at. So what's next? This beautiful. So you've planned a standalone lesson. You should think through what tomorrow looks like with that same group of students, what a week from now looks like with those same group of students, either based on the assessments that you collected or the next logical curricular step based on your lesson. That's a pretty standard question in the debrief that you'll have. If you don't have time for that debrief conversation after, it's something that you can include in your thank you note. Okay, so you can say, I really love this opportunity, I envision this happening next.
So for the debrief, would that be something the interviewer would ask of you, or what would you do, or you should bring up the result?
Yeah. I would let the interviewer take the lead, but it's a pretty common question in that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Mhm. So oftentimes after the demo lesson, you'll have 20 minutes with your interviewer to go over how did the lesson go, what would you change, all of those kind of questions. And often in that protocol, there's okay, what would you do with these students tomorrow?
If you're just given like one subject, how do you know what next subject should be, and it could be anything.
So it should be, what lesson would you teach next in that subject area?
So let's say it was like the exponents, you would do like, longer ones next or something, or would you go latest next?
So math is certainly not my repertoire. But let's say my lesson is on, I'm not going to pretend to know exponents. I know 2 squared, but that's not going to be helpful for this purpose. Let's say my lesson is on multiplication, and we did multiply 1 digit by 1 digit up to 10. I can then say I collected the exit slips. 80% of the students mastered it. For those that didn't, my next day would be that they would be doing flashcards. For my students that did do that, I would have them do 1 digit by 2 digit. So you're creating the curricular map, hypothetically, that you would do. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, and excuse my lack of high school math. No, exponents are like middle school, so excuse that. Yeah.
So in essence, you could kind of like figure this out beforehand.
Yeah, you want to figure it out beforehand, because you won't, your nerves are going to just be crazy, right? And there's going to be a kid who's screaming down the hallway. There's going to be something that takes you off your game, so just be as prepared as possible. Anything else around this, thinking through what's next question? One thing that I'll add that I didn't think to ahead of time is make sure that you're really respectful of the students that you worked with and the classroom that you worked with. So oftentimes there's going to be a student who has a big behavioral challenge. You don't know the story of that student. So it's really important to, in your reflection, not to put down that student in any way, shape, or form, right? Because him losing it might be 10 times better than how he used to lose it, right? Maybe he didn't even get into the classroom for the first week of school. You don't know those types of things, so it's really important that you frame everything really positively and focus on growth. So strategies to tackle these challenges. As I said, it's going to feel like a lot we're going to talk through. So what are some things that you are going to make sure that you do in your demo lesson, given the challenge that you don't know the students? What's something that you'll do? Make text, yep. Anything else?
Or if you don't have time for name tags, if we have the kids want to rub, you can do like a brief intro after fill out their names.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can also look up different quick icebreakers, right? Like maybe they put a thumbs up or thumbs down based on different statements. They could even be loosely related to the content or the book that you're reading. Just think about different ways to really build that rapport, even with a short amount of time. You'll also think through your proximity, right? So this lesson is with adults, and I'm not my healthiest today, so I won't be getting that close to you. But if I were evaluating my performance, right, and I have a group of high school or middle school or even elementary school students, I want to see that like really close interaction between them. So maybe there's a student and you can whisper, you know, what's your name, something during the times where they're working independently. Okay, so think about ways that you can build those relationships. What's something that you'll do to overcome the challenge of student behavior?
In the beginning, we need to set clear expectations.
Yeah. And then you'll focus on positive discipline. Okay. So if there's a student who's not doing what they should, you're going to point out the students who are meeting that expectation, not belittle that one student, right? Because again, you don't know what they're going through and what their response to those redirections would be. Okay. That doesn't mean that you should be, you know, to use my mother-in-law example, like stepping on eggshells and not engaging with those students when you see them not doing the right thing, but you can refer to the clear expectations that you've set, right? Like, I'm expecting that everyone is sitting up straight on the rug before I can continue, instead of saying, hey, you're not doing this, right? Because you don't have a relationship with them, so then they'll act out.
So, what about if a student has like a total like meltdown?
Mhm.
Like I'm just kind of envisioning the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Where it just disrupts everything.
Yeah.
Like start having a tantrum. I'm in elementary, so that's why
Yeah.
I kind of think about that. Do you have any advice
Yeah.
for that? Does the property teacher or the administrator usually jump in at that point, or like?
Yeah, so they won't jump in for a lot, right? Because they kind of want to see how you're doing. And once someone jumps in, then that takes away your authority with the group.
Right.
If there was a situation where a student is really screaming or doing something like that, I might go up to them really quickly and say, like, how can we work through this together? You know, I need you to get back. Kind of see what set them off in the first place. If it's really a crazy thing, I might use my body and kind of like redirect the students, right? So that they're not focused on him flailing in the corner, but maybe focused on the book again.
Okay.
It's hard to do, and it's hard when you start thinking through these like really worst case scenarios. In my experience, students that will go from 0 to 60 aren't in the demo lessons. It's more so the minor off-task behavior that they want to see that you check. So there won't necessarily be the student who, you know, is throwing himself on the floor. What more like will happen is you'll set the expectation, you know, I'm the only one talking, we're gonna do one mic, and then there's gonna be who talking to their friend, so it's telling them that.
Wait, so are the lessons not with, like, with the case of elementary, it's not a set class, do they gather students? Because you're saying that you wouldn't probably put the really, like,
Yeah. So what we would do is we would say you're giving this lesson with this class, there's up to 25 students. If there's a student who's having a particularly bad day, they might be with their interventionist that period, they might be in a buddy classroom for that period. Yeah. It might also be structured in that way where you're gonna do a small group lesson with 10 students, and they might do that.
Yeah, you're right, they might, pull that particular student out, because I know like at my school, we have quality review, and the people from the outside come in and administrators wanna make sure everything looks really nice. Those children are, that's great, those children are, they're pulled out, they might be in another room somewhere doing an art project or talking to someone.
Yeah. And I think, situations may come up. If it's a safety issue, the other adults in the room will certainly do that. I would just tread lightly, because you don't want to escalate a behavior or be seen as sort of setting it off, and just again refer to the clear expectations. So the biggest thing will be, if you say that you're the only one talking, make sure you're the only one talking, and little stuff like that. If you say that we're going to be sitting up, make sure that, the student is laying, gets a redirection. So out of your comfort or content, the strategy is just fake it till you make it, right? You're gonna be out of your comfort zone, right? There are some schools that they say, plan a 6th grade lesson, and then you get there and 6th grade's on a field trip. Surprise! So you're gonna do your lesson with 7th grade, right? Or maybe, it's your first demo lesson. So all of those things are gonna come up. It's just acting and being ready for those challenges. So my first 2 years teaching, I literally dressed in what I thought was a costume. Like I put on my buttoned shirt. I never would wear a buttoned up shirt any other time, but that was sort of my teacher costume, and that's what made me feel comfortable. Okay. New career, same deal. Fake it till you make it. Technology fails. Have backup.
Question about the previous one. What if they ask, or the student asks, or somehow comes up, like on the subject matter material that you're not sure, should you try your best to answer it or just say you don't know?
Yeah. So what if the student asks a question you don't know? What are some things that we can do?
Well, I was in that situation one time where like if we asked, you could just say, yeah, I don't know, like, and then actually after the debrief they said, oh, it was very great to see it, and they're not really confident of that. So if you don't know that much or full 100%, even though you prepare a lot, there's always a chance that the students ask a question that you don't know. And just say, oh, we don't know this, let's find out together. And you could go on the computer and then go to trustee website and then Google it together, or you could ask the student that, why don't you find out for your homework tomorrow and then let me know if you really found out or something.
Yeah. It's totally fine. To not know something. I think it's much better to admit that than try to make up an answer and then get caught in something. You can also pose the question back to the group if there's time. You can also say, oh, can you drop that down? And I would follow up with you tomorrow. What happens if the students say we did this? Because they'll say it even if they didn't do it, by the way. So what is something that you could say?
maybe you could say, I can probably teach it a little bit differently, or you might learn something new this time, or sometimes it's good to learn things again because you know it better.
Yeah. That's something one way. You'll also have the worksheet, right? So if they whiz through and you can say, if you got this and you whiz through it, I have a challenge exercise for you. And just show that you're ready for it. If it's a book that you read, you can say, this is my favorite book. I've probably read it, 50 times. And just kind of validate it, but keep it moving too. your nerves, you're gonna fake it. Walking into a new space, what is the strategy that we talked about that you'll do to overcome that? Yeah.
Familiarize yourself with the space beforehand.
Yeah. What else? Yeah.
Bring what you need.
Exactly. I've seen demos happen, you know, in the hallway by a stairwell. I've seen them happen in a classroom. You don't know what's happening the rest of the school day, and that's why bringing what you need is going to be super important. Okay.
Back to when you were saying you did this, what if they, like, do the schools give demo lessons that, are lessons that were previously taught in the year, or do they give you a brand new topic?
Yeah. It could be a combination of both, right? They could just have, you know, any candidate that demos for second grade, this is gonna be the objective at whatever point in the year. Other times it might just be, you think you had a really inventive lesson and they've done it before. It'll depend on the school.
The way you're teaching is.
Exactly. The way you're teaching is different. The way that you're gonna bring the community together, you're gonna bring some joy to it, all of that will be different. And then what do you do if you just get a bad vibe from an admin or someone who's watching?
Don't look at them.
Yeah, don't look at them. Fake it till you make it, right? So I think about one coworker that I had, and she would never say good morning. And this one colleague of mine, every morning would go into her room. Oh, good morning! I'm so happy to see you. You know, just turn it on. You also don't know who the decision makers are, right? So if somebody doesn't seem to really be in your lesson the whole time, you don't know if the teacher maybe is going to be making the decision. So just be nice to everyone and do your best for it. So we're going to take, it is 7:20, and I was expecting to be wrapped up in 10 minutes. Show of hands, this is the assessment I said not to do. Who would think it'd be helpful to have 5 minutes to sort of jot down what they've been doing? Awesome, so we're gonna scrap that. So share out and questions. Revisiting our objective. The objective was to identify the inherent challenges of a demo lesson and plan to avoid these pitfalls. Can I see a thumbs up if you feel like we've accomplished that objective, a thumbs down if you feel like we missed the mark? Again, what I told you not to do. Thank you for those thumbs up. So I appreciate that. Does anyone have any questions that weren't answered that you want to raise to the group? Karen.
Yeah, about the debrief. So I know you talked about this idea of where would you go next, but what else typically happens at debrief? I'm guessing they maybe ask you what you think you did well, what you think you can improve on, but
Yeah.
if there's anything else.
Yeah, so debrief questions. What did you do well? What would you have done differently? What do you see happening tomorrow? Scenarios.
Scenarios.
You mean like of things that happened, or?
So let's say, they'll ask you if you was teaching a class, and let's say a kid threw a pencil across the room, what would you do?
So it's not really related to what you did, but it's like
So
a follow-up that they
follow-up,
would
so it's like
say.
debriefing up and with different scenarios, what you like, how would you handle the class?
They might ask you how did you differentiate for different types of learners, which we talked through a couple of scenarios. That question is pretty common. They might ask, I'm going through the protocol that I asked, what do you believe our community, what do you think our community believes about good teaching based on what you saw? So you might be in the classroom for 5 minutes before your lesson begins. If this is a school that you actually want to teach at, you should think about what about that school solidified that by being there. So think through that. How does your teaching fit in with what we believe about good teaching? That's going to be really important. That's how selective will help as well. The big thing there is you can't prepare everything, but having a general understanding and communicating that lesson wasn't perfect, but I'm also not gonna go home and beat myself up over it, and I'm gonna create actionable things that I would do differently. That's what they really wanna see. They wanna see that you can reflect and then adjust your practice. Yes.
So I'm not really sure if there's a question involved, but as far as the challenge of being given a content area that's not your specific content area, maybe do you have like more strategies for that? Because that's happened to me a lot, and then I guess it's like trying to figure out what the school is looking for.
I would look at Engage New York for exemplar lessons. So if they asked me to teach a high school math lesson, I would really verse myself in what should exemplary high school math instruction look like. I think it's also thinking through where are you getting tripped up on your understanding, and then how can you build meaningful student activities around that. So if in your preparation you're having a really hard time with vocabulary, then I'm going to think about what visual do I have for the vocabulary, what's a kinesthetic way that they can learn the vocabulary, how can I break down these problem steps for them. So sometimes you not knowing will help you understand how to support the students that are struggling. I would also wonder the reason why it's totally out of your content area. So is it that you're new to teaching? Is it that you're interviewing for a position where maybe you wouldn't ultimately be happy with? So it's like thinking through that, because the schools that I've worked with and interviewed with generally want the person set up for success as much as possible. So just think through that too.
I've done a demo lesson without any students, like it was during the summer, and
Just as adults?
Yeah, I was an adult, and then at that moment I wasn't sure that should I like think them as a student, and I even asked them like should I pretend that they were students, like how should I act, and then they didn't really like respond me, they were like just do whatever you want. So like I'm not sure, like if we're in that situation again, like I'm not sure how should I do, like do the double lesson without any students, like do they do advice?
Yeah, that's where the settings and norms would come in handy. So you can say, you know, all right, class, and maybe even before you begin, say, I'm going to deliver this lesson as if you were a group of 6th grade math students.
That's kind of how I did, but then they're kind of asking like, you know, what would you do if the students joined the biology and something like that?
The honest answer too is that they hate it as much as you do. Like they don't want to be doing that. So either the class that they thought were going to be there didn't show up, right? So sometimes in the summer they'll text a bunch of kids like, hey, can you come by school? We're going to do a demo lesson, and then the kids don't show up. Or maybe they just designed it that way, and it's really awkward for them. I think just faking it and setting those expectations. Yeah.
What about like understanding classroom rooms that are already set up? How much can you ask? I mean, something basic, like you don't know what the size of a balcony bar is. You don't know.
Yeah.
Are they allowed to, you know, ask for a break? I don't know. You know, and how much do you ask about, and how much do you do as well? Like in terms of incorporating, like, okay, you know, I like to decide a chair that looks like this, not to overwhelm them.
I would think about what the time limit of the lesson is, right? So I think it's totally fine to not have students go to the bathroom if your lesson is 10 minutes, right? Can a student not go to the bathroom for 45 minutes? No. So if you get caught in that, right? So the school we worked at, right? Like if the student did this, they had to go to the bathroom, right? So if you see a student do that, you can ask somebody, hey, what does that symbol mean? Or do that. You don't want to ask too many questions of the teacher because there's going to be things that you don't know anyway. So I think just setting the norms around it is going to be key. Yeah. It's also perfectly fine to ask the teacher what's your go-to silent signal. You know, something that you know that you'll use, but just ask a really like closed question. Okay. We'll take a question in the front, and then I just want to make sure that everybody had their questions, and then I'll be around after too.
So we talked about a lot of like great factors and criteria for improving your lesson, but I'm just curious if like overall the school has like the overriding criteria for accepting you, like maybe you messed up on one thing or another and you weren't perfect
It'll depend on the particular school. So there was nothing when I was analyzing demo lessons that they had to have. The deal breaker to me was if they didn't show that they were reflective or they didn't show that they could connect to the students, right? Because those things we can't teach, right? So if you don't have a superb content knowledge, probably okay, unless you're interviewing for like the department lead, right? But think about, that's the strength of this platform, is helping you find a school match, right? So communicating what you can't teach is gonna be the most important. What you can't teach people, right? Like I can't teach someone how to connect with a child, right? You either have it or you don't. I can't teach someone when their lesson bombed, how they have to reflect on their lesson if they're closed off to understanding that it bombed, right? Because they're just gonna bomb it the next day too.
So, and you also focus on like teaching the material during your lesson. How do you show like that you made an extra teaching material?
Yeah. So the classroom norms that you set, the cheers that you might bring, the ways that you reward student behavior. So it might just be a sticker, not in high school, but if it's in high school, you know, maybe you have like a, you know, Hall of Fame for scientists or, you know, whatever it is. It's all those pieces that come in. So it's 7:30 on the dot. So I want to answer individual questions that you have. I'll be here to answer them. And then this